Hello, today I'll be evaluating my thriller opening for AS Media, which we titled Gone. I'll be discussing the positives and negatives of this film and how those negatives could potentially be improved. So without much further ado, let's get into this. When we planned out our thriller opening, we made sure that it was relevant to the conventions of thriller openings or thriller films in general, but more importantly we had to make sure that it was relevant to the narrative, so the material that we shot was appropriate for the task that we were set. In this extract we can see the protagonist and antagonist in a theory phone conversation. One of the objectives of our task was to use conventions of thriller films, therefore we made the antagonist on the other side of the call barely visible so the viewer of the film can't make out who the antagonist is. This creates an enigma which was key throughout the film. This phone conversation was relative to the narrative, as later on in the thriller opening, the protagonist is killed by the antagonist which she was having a phone call with. This does answer some questions for the viewer of the thriller opening, but it also leaves some questions like, why did he kill his own wife and what was his motives? This is really good technique because it creates enigma, which, as I've said, was key to our thriller opening. And just to create more enigma, the only thing that people know about the antagonist is that he's in a relationship with the protagonist, Addy, and the only other thing they know about him is that his name is Marcus, which, I mean, that's not a lot you can know about a character, therefore, obviously, it creates questions, like I've said. However, in terms of narrative, about things being relevant to the narrative, there could also be some criticisms that we can make from this thriller opening. In this extract, we can see the car parking, the protagonist gets out the car and walks to the house, and then it cuts to the next scene. Some may see this scene as kind of useless to the narrative, and they might just see it as like the sole purpose of the scene is just to establish some continuity. But there's other ways that this could have been achieved, like they could have used a fade transition to show time passing between the car and the house. It does have opening credits as well, but they could be used like anywhere in the opening, really. Like, any part of the scene, they could have like the names of the actors pop up, or the credits for the other people behind the scenes of the movie, like the director, etc. So yeah, and also some may consider just like showing off some good camera work, because the camera work in that scene is ambitious, but at the end of the day, it could be seen as useless to narrative, and it doesn't really serve any purpose to it. And if you've got rid of that part of the thriller opening, the narrative would not really be disrupted, and it would still probably make sense to the viewer. Talking about camera work, I might as well go on and discuss it further, therefore I will. The camera work is very controlled throughout, and even though I did criticise the use of ambitious camera work, the ambitious camera work is used in other parts that aren't just like showing off, but they actually serve some form of meaning, like they actually portray something. For instance, a good example of that to show would be the last scene in the movie, the hot tub scene. In the majority of the scenes in our thriller opening, we mainly use the tripod, which is evident as, to the viewer, there's no obvious shaky movement. But in some of the scenes we had to use handheld camera movement, therefore we try to make it as controlled as possible, and from my judgment it is actually quite controlled and is also used effectively. However, the camera work isn't perfect throughout. For instance, despite the camera being steady in the car scene, the shaky green screen movement creates an illusion of uncontrolled camera movement. This makes the scene look fake or not very realistic, which can be off-putting for the viewer. Now let's talk about framing. The framing throughout is used well, I guess. Like, there's no bad framing, but there's some scenes where like if you pay close attention, you can see that there's actually a lot of attention has been put into framing. For instance, in the car scene where like Addy's having a phone conversation with Marcus, Like, yeah, it doesn't seem like a big deal until like you realise that the framing, like the phone conversation, they're shot in two different complete settings. So to keep the framing the same in both, it's actually, well, quite impressive. The conversation didn't break continuity. It looked very smooth, and it was done very effectively. But with that being said, in other scenes, it doesn't look bad, but you can tell that we didn't pay a lot of attention to framing, and it's not used that effectively. But in general, that has a minor effect on the product. Like, as I've said, it's other scenes we've not really paid attention to it, but it's not bad. Like, it's not terribly bad. It doesn't actually break continuity or anything. So overall, the framing is quite good. Do you notice a difference between these two shots? If you guessed they use different shot sizes, then you're correct. And yes, throughout the movie, we used a variety of different shot sizes. However, we didn't just plock in a bunch of different shot sizes just for the sake of having a variety of shot sizes. We actually, like the shot sizes, each different one actually conveys meaning. Like they're used to actually convey something or imply something. For instance, in various scenes of our movie, we use close-ups to show emotion, i.e. the car scene, so when Addie's at breaking point, for instance. But other parts, we used long shots to show the viewer's surroundings or establish the scene. Like at the very beginning, we show the motorway with a long shot, so they know she's driving on a busy motorway, or when she's parking the car, like she's home. However, they're not perfect. For instance, when she's walking into the house, she's still having a phone conversation. However, what I notice is, so if I can notice it, the viewer can notice it as well, but what I notice is that when she's on the phone, and it cuts to Marcus on the other side of the phone, when it cuts back to her, she's saying like this, she's just closer. Like, more closer. Basically, what I'm trying to say is the shot size changes between the shots, and it's fine because we were cutting, but it looks kind of weird, and it's just an imperfection. But with that being said, overall, we used a variety of shot sizes, which achieved a sense of a good movie. Like, we used them effectively. Now, all these shots, they reveal something, and they reveal mise-en-scène. Now, I can say that throughout the whole movie, mise-en-scène was planned and used correctly. For instance, a good example of how mise-en-scène has been used correctly. In this scene, we really focus on the poison prop, plus other props in the scene to connote danger. Obviously, you can see this, like, it's really effective as, like, this creates some sort of tension with the music in the background, just adding or exaggerating that sense of uneasiness, I guess. However, with that being said, some elements of mise-en-scène weren't really planned. One that we didn't really plan was lighting. Throughout the daylight scenes, at least, the nighttime scenes we did light up, obviously, because you wouldn't be able to see anything. But in the daylight scenes, we fully relied on daylight, and it worked fine with our movie because it didn't really break continuity. However, it could have easily broke continuity. Like, we might have to film another scene again, and if it's a different daylight or something, then it wouldn't look good. It would look really unprofessional. However, with lighting, you can achieve some sense of continuity. So, like, you need to reshoot something, you could use the exact same lighting, and it would look very similar or nearly the same. And to the viewer, it wouldn't break continuity. So we got lucky, but next time, to improve it, we would obviously use lighting in daylight and nighttime scenes, just so like because if we need to reshoot material, it won't break continuity, thankfully. If you watch carefully, you can see a very obvious break of continuity. In the phone conversation, This is an example where editing didn't quite go to plan as we would have intended. There are elements though where editing is used effectively and it did go to plan as we intended. For instance, the use of the soundtrack helps foreshadow events in the thriller. So like when she's driving in her car and she's about to go in the house, the soundtrack is a bit eerie, it's a bit dark, so therefore the audience or the viewer might think, oh god, no, something terrible is going to happen, which obviously she dies, so that is probably a terrible thing. Also, we used other elements of it. So for instance, in the phone conversation, the antagonist has got these filters on which make him even less identifiable than he already is, which coincidentally creates enigma, which that's what we always aim to do in this thriller opening. So therefore we use editing as we intended, and I feel it's been used effectively. We used a variety of transitions, including some that are quite ambitious. For instance, the graphic match between the hot tub, like you see, so it goes down under the water, you see this hot tub light, and then a graphic match of the circular shape of like this poisonous or toxic material that the antagonist or whoever, well obviously the audience don't know who's making it, but they assume it's the antagonist making this poison. This is a really good transition as it's still like keeps the flow, I guess, or the continuity, but it's also quite ambitious and shows off plan. It shows off we had a plan when we made this. Other transitions we use, such as fades between the house scene and the hot tub scene, just so time passes, so between daylight and nighttime we use effectively. However, some elements of editing, not just transition, but some element editing, like maybe the phone conversation with the filters. The filters are slightly less realistic, like some may seem as a bit cartoonish, and technically that could break continuity. But overall, the editing has been done to a really high standard, which is good. Throughout the movie, the use of sound, or how we recorded sound, is good. You can tell that we recorded the dialogue separately, as there's no annoying background noise or just this frustrating to listen to white noise. Therefore, throughout the movie, the sound's been recorded fine. However, in one particular scene, it's not that it's recorded badly, but it's just not well recorded. The scene I'm talking about is when we see the established shot when we see the car parking in. If we remove the non-diegetic sound, this is what it sounds like. As you can see, it's very boring. Therefore, apart from that, other scenes there's always diegetic sound. But in that particular scene, like the door closing, the car drive, there's no car driving sounds. It seems slightly unrealistic. And also, if you were to remove the soundtrack, it's very boring. As I've said, it's really boring. With all that being said, it's time to conclude. And overall, I feel there's been more positives than negatives, and the negatives I've pointed out are much smaller compared to the positives, so the positives outweigh the negatives. Therefore, to conclude again, I've got to say that our thriller open is really good, and we use various conventions effectively throughout the whole thriller opening, which is what we achieved to do, and that's what we have achieved. So therefore, I'm going to sign out today.